Alright, starting up. Definitely didn't forget anything. The mic's not muted this time, and I definitely didn't start streaming 10 minutes ago and think I was early and then realized that I was muted the entire time and the video was off. That definitely didn't happen. And on the upside, there's absolutely no video evidence of that. Also, that's being the problem. More importantly, hi everyone, I'm Airier, and today we're going to do me geeking out over a competent writer's work. This is going to be a fan with too much time, Star Wars Episode 30, Sins of the Arrogant. And also, I literally have the name right in front of me. I decided to look to the side to read it off again. I don't know why. Weird. More importantly, I do have a time limit for when I can record today because I'm married and I don't want to do something called getting divorced by pissing off my wife, which I managed to avoid last time. And this time, well, it won't be as bad as the one time I did a 9-hour stream and she thought it was going to be an hour long, and I had to apologize for that because, yeah, we're trying to avoid that. More importantly, we're going to jump right in. We just got to the midway point on episode 30, and I want to see how much of this we can get in before I have to immediately shut down everything and hopefully close the stream at the same time, because I'm not sure what would happen if I decided to end the stream by turning off the power to my system rather than, you know, actually ending it. That'd be weird. Otherwise, let's get started. Also, 1 second. Had to sneeze. Man, yeah. I do all this off camera most of the time. Is it just in the back? Oh, good. Yeah, I got myself in such a way that I need to reposition. Also, I can't open my door right now because I have a bunch of kittens who like to chew on wires. So I am in a furnace right now. It is so freaking hot in here. Like, dear God, if there's a scene from Mustafar, I'm gonna be like, oh, wow. That place looks so calm and temperate right now. That would be a nice, relaxing, cool breeze. Oh, my God. More importantly, let's set this up. I think I like it. All right. I think everything's working well. I think I haven't broken anything. And more importantly, the stream hasn't crashed yet. So Comcast, actually, I'm not going to finish that sentence. I know how that will go. There's a time of tempting fate and there's a time of tempting Comcast. Comcast will actively seek out pain. Kind of like fate, actually. More importantly, let's start this up. Javona. Do we know this character yet? Or is this a new one?
Javona was pushed into the wide, steel-barred room with the rest of the aliens. She had been found...
Oh, okay, so aliens, so it's not the clone army, and it's probably not definitely not a Jedi, because they don't get pushed around easily. So, it looks like we're in a prison camp for the alien. It's probably an alien internment camp. Just that little reminder, the Imperials are technically still evil. Even if by comparison, they are the less evil.
Found in the latest purge raids, and after a thorough interrogation, one which left her without 3 of her fingers and covered in bruises, they had thrown her into a confinement cell and let her sit without food, water, or medical aid for what she could only guess was hours or...
Admittedly, for the Imperials, that's actually pretty light. It's still horrible, but yeah, she ain't dead. That is surprising.
days. She had been so careful until now. She had managed to stay hidden for so long. But one mistake, one bad encounter, one report on her appearance, and they had come for her. If they had not been so sure she was part of a cell or group of her kind, then they likely would have killed her right there and then. And, of course, she was. But she'd choose 1,000,000 deaths before betraying her family or her kind to the death-worshipping fanatics who had taken her.
I mean, they could do that. There's a time where 1,000 deaths is probably the upside.
Javona had shivered as she contemplated such thoughts, for she knew that they may well attempt to force her through that very trial. If they could do so without her expiring. There were so few like her left now, after all the purges and the searches and the Space Marines. She had barely avoided them. Her
They
skin
came through?
color and facial features had always helped her pass for human much more easily than the rest of her family.
What species is she?
An unrequested blessing she'd found herself relying on for her very survival. With that thought present in her mind, she unwove the loose turban she wore over her head, making her alien features more obvious to the others around her, putting them and herself more at ease. Since she was still dressed in the Imperial fatigues she had stolen for her disguise. The dirty, frightened faces around her, emaciated and discolored, softened right away with the revelation. In this horrible place, even being able to recognize your species was irrelevant.
Also, just random thing. Why is everyone talking about holding a lime in chat? And fans here and he chimed in, he's also holding a lime. I feel I'm missing something, and I'm not going to ask because it might be a spoiler. More importantly, I love how they're talking about the Space Marines coming through, because that tells me something that I didn't know before. The Space Marines were directly involved in pacifying the planet. I was under the assumption that it was the Imperial Guard, because they're the ones mostly left there. And this is something that might have been mentioned before, it might not have, but if Space Marines were directly involved, they did go in, they did pacify, they did probably give the Crimson Razors an excuse to go out and get all the slaughter they seem to crave. But they were directly involved, at least somewhat.
It was enough to not be human, or at least not Imperial human. Their hatred, their persecution, effectively made all who found themselves here of the same race. The door behind Javona slammed shut, making her jump and submerging her in darkness.
Also, just a random funny thing. Calling it its own race is an interesting usage by fan. This isn't a comment on him, just an interesting thing about genetics. The difference between a race and a species is just within the same species. And even if someone looks different, they could still interbreed. They could still have kids that are viable, as opposed to a donkey and a horse creating a mule, which is a sterile creature. When you can have multiple species in Star Wars that can interbreed with viable offspring, that's not a different species. That's a human offshoot, or humanity is an offshoot of that species. And they're just different enough that they look significantly different, but they're still within the same species family. Because successfully viable children, who then could have children of their own, which a lot of species in Star Wars do, imply that they are part of the same thing. This is one of those old sci-fi things that is being corrected more in current sci-fi to be closer to how actual genetics work. But I love how it carries over. So the term, what race are you, is actually more accurate than what species are you, because there is a difference between some species and some races. And then you have weird things like coyotes and wolves interbreeding with a successful race that's been created within the last decade or two. And it's absolutely terrifying because it's as cunning as a coyote, but as big as a wolf. And they're absolutely terrifying. There's rabid packs of them. And I mean rabid in the sense, I think some of them have rabies. It's terrifying.
The creaking of locks and seals activating and sliding into place sounded from where the door had been in the blinding darkness, and Javona was left blinking in shadows for almost 5 minutes before her eyes adjusted enough to allow her to see anything. The whole place was crowded,
prison camps that they recruit from.
Like her previous holding cell, there were no toilets, much less bathrooms, though the floor was coated in loose, dusty sand and plenty of worthless, discarded junk. While they were not pressed shoulder to shoulder, there was clearly not enough space for all of them to lie down, even if...
I see how it is. Yeah, they're getting the VIP treatment. And in terms of the Imperium, a quick death is technically a VIP treatment. And I'm not even joking about that. That is actually a lot kinder than a lot of the ways people are treated.
If any of them wanted to make contact with the filthy floor. She walked, running her hands along the metal bracings of the oddly mechanical textured walls. So complicated. She wondered if this room had been repurposed into a general holding cell, and if so, what had it been before? She reached an odd detail then, a bulky, fist-sized nodule of metal, roughly round in shape and protruding 3 inches from the surface of the wall.
Skull?
She felt it out with her fingers, squinting at it. It had some sort of a hole near the top, and it almost looked like some kind of reinforced metal nozzle. A metal nozzle on a wall.
Oh.
She squinted a little harder and looked down the length of it, noticing the vague lumps proceeding further and further down at regular intervals, the same pattern repeating above her head as well. Rows and rows of nozzles? Then, a sudden sharp fear plunged into her gut, a freezing blade of revelation. She kneeled down, pinching some of the sand between her fingers and dabbing the digits against her tongue. Not sand, ashes. She reached down further and grabbed one of the discarded items. Not an item, but a charred bone wreathed in burnt fiber. Terror thrilled within her as she stood up and looked around once more. This...
Okay, so it's not actually a firing line. I was hoping that would go that way. It's the other side, industrial. Just letting you know, yeah, this is what the Imperium is patterned off because they're supposed to be over-the-top evil. Yet somehow they're the good guys, if only because everything else is worse. Although I think actually what they're based off, the joke, of course, is they're based off more of the Axis powers, but a lot of their actual basing is more, depends on who you're looking at. It's more Roman, actually, and which is one of the reasons the Ultramarines are a really good example of it. But then you get to Terror, and prior to the siege, it did look very high Roman as well.
This was not a holding cell. This was a death chamber. She ran as quickly as she could, reaching the door and yanking on it, fingers closing around the steel texture and rivets. It did not budge in the slightest, but it did blast her with a near lethal amount of electrical volts, sending her careening back against the crowd behind her. Smoking, twitching, the reason none of the others were attempting to assault their way out the door seemed clear enough. Again, she had no concept of how long it took her to recover and stand up, but the time was given over to her as she found herself still alive by then. She waited. They all waited, and waited, and waited.
And just to point out, as horrible as this scene sounds, in the chat right now, Fan just said, I'm actually smoothing over it. It's actually worse than it sounds. If he's responding to someone in the chat who's saying something horrible is happening, or here, I don't know. Could be both. But I think the message is the same either way, and probably accurate.
She would have thought they would get it over with quickly. Didn't the damned corpse worshippers have other people to burn to death today? But the sadistic captors seemed content to force them all to wait for their execution within the uncomfortable, cramped space. Soon, she began to wonder if they would all suffocate here, first from breathing each other's air, before finally there was the sound of a metallic thumping and clinking. She felt her bladder nearly go entirely weak.
Yeah. The worst part is, it still technically is one of the nicer ways to die in the Imperium, if only because some of the ways they want to make it intentionally horrible are worse. This is industrial, as opposed to, I mean, yeah, it's still going to be burning to death. It's still going to be horrible, and I hope it doesn't go into too much detail, obviously. But also, there's a lot of stuff. Anything with a redemption engine, it can get a lot worse.
At that moment, but held strong for long enough to realize it was the door in front of her making the noise, and not the walls around her. They were going to add someone else to the room. Javona decided in that moment that she would rush the door, regardless of the consequences.
Being shot and dying that way would probably be safer.
What was the worst they could do? Kill her? At least she would not be left waiting for death in this vile, stinking darkness. She braced herself for a run, crouching slightly. And when the light came through, blinding her temporarily, she ran at full speed, screaming as she charged into certain death, or at least severe pain. To her surprise, her body connected with one of the armored guards, and she, as well as the Imperial, went tumbling back and against the wall. They began to struggle then, Javona punching him twice and hurting her fists on his armor as she rolled on top of him. Eyes closed, she clung to the front of his vest, in no way a fighter, at least not before now. She expected to feel the hard smacking of an elbow or rifle butt into the side of her head. But instead, she felt the light knocking of metal knuckles rapping against her head crest. She opened her eyes then, and gasped. Hey, I'm guessing you don't like it in there very much. Would you like to, I don't know, get out of here?
The fuck? Partially because what the fuck is fans showing us right now? Is this like an armor of the clones without the outer plating? 1, cool. 2, it's either that or heavily bone style, and that's weird. Also, apparently we are looking at a breakout right now. Damn.
Asked the clearly non-Imperial soldier who lay beneath her, speaking the local language of the planet she had found herself on. A veritable waterfall of emotions fell through Javona at that point, tears which were already on her face intensifying, heart thumping as hope and disbelief conjoined there. You are the Republic? She managed to ask through clumsy galactic basic. Well, close enough. My name's Combeer, and
the fuck?
And yours? He asked.
How the hell did he storm an Imperial garrison? He was like, unless I'm mistaken, Combeer was the kid, right? Who just got his first kill with the... What? No, I must be mistaken.
Javona, she said, blinking tears rapidly out of her eyes.
He was in Mandalorian armor.
Nice to meet you, Javona. So, I hate to make any demands, especially of someone as, pretty as you, but,
Is he hitting on her?
Get up and help my people finish the rescue.
Oh, it's not just
he
him,
said,
okay.
Still pinned beneath her.
And that's why they're doing it, because they have people there so they can get extra forces to fight with. Okay.
Javona blushed and nodded hastily, climbing back and off of him as well as rising to her feet. It was then that she noticed that they were not alone. Other men like Combeer, though dressed in an assortment of armor, were helping escort the other prisoners out of the cells. He rose, and after a while, was leading the escort that was taking them away, Javona not far behind.
Good timing on the raid.
The corridors were scorched with weapons fire, and every couple of steps or turns, they would be forced to step over or trample a fallen Imperial soldier.
Take their guns.
You and these fight through the Imperium?
It's probably prison guards as opposed to anything more competent. Not really sure how much, though. And people in the comment, we got a comment of waifu moment. Oh yeah, girl falling on the guy. I mean, technically it was to intentionally murder them, but we'll ignore that part.
She asked him as they went. He nodded, not looking back, still seeming wary, clearly not sure they had gotten them all on the way in. Yeah, though it wasn't as hard as you think.
Why?
There were barely any of them left in the camp when we arrived.
Were they pulling out?
Come on, this way, to the courtyards. He said, taking her hand and leading her further into the prison. Courtyards are in center of camp. No way out there, she said, and though she could not see it, Combeer grinned inside his helmet. Don't worry, you'll see,
what?
He assured her. And sure enough, when he opened the hatch out into the barren courtyard, her breath was taken away. Parked across the entire space and floating, hovering on repulsor lifts above them, was a fleet of ships.
What?
All civilian, space-worthy craft, most of which came equipped with blaster cannons, turrets, and other standard defenses.
Okay. I already love the scene. Anything that involves ships, man, I'm geeking out so hard.
And from the burning peeled remnants of the defense turrets and watchtowers which
they had aerial superiority.
Camp, it was clear that they had been used,
which would still be enough against regular troop Imperials.
Combeer paused to wave everyone through and make sure no one had been left behind, ushering out prisoners into waiting ships and helping those ships take off and new ships to land when their capacity had been filled up. Javona knew that she could leave at any time from that moment, get onto any of the waiting ships that stood by. But, instead, she chose to stay near Combeer, waiting for him to conclude what he was doing, intent on being on his ship by the end. She did not have to wait too long, for Combeer and the others had cleared most of the prison, only thinking to check the actual execution chambers near the end of their search for survivors.
And that's why it took so long.
His ship was no starfighter, but not as large as some of the others that had landed. Luckily for her, as far as she was concerned, Combeer had no other survivors waiting on space, and so no other prisoners joined them as she followed him up the ramp to his ship. Hey Mom, we got one passenger coming aboard.
Oh, his mom's here?
He said as they stepped
because
inside.
She was also a fighter too.
Who? A survivor? She asked, twisting around to look at Javona. Combeer nodded and gestured back towards her. Meet Javona, he said. Javona waved.
I know it's weird and it was probably just introduced off screen, but I guess she introduced herself off screen.
Feeling uncharacteristically shy under the woman's sudden scrutiny, which ultimately settled over her alien features approvingly. Javona waved, feeling uncharacteristically shy under the woman's sudden
Still kind of curious what
scrutiny,
species.
which ultimately settled over her alien features approvingly. It was a novel sensation, for before now, only her own family had ever looked kindly on the small purple ridge which crowned the center of her upper brows, or the bald, smooth expanse of her hairless head. The
Oh, fuck. She's part of a cell. She's used to her family liking how she looks. She looks close to human, but has purple. How long has she been on this planet? Because that is a very telling answer. If she just got on the planet, okay, she came with everyone else. If she was already on the planet, if she was on the planet prior to the start of this, that means that there are gene stealers there. Because I know what purple ridge on the forehead means and anything to do with 40K. There is a very distinct look to that.
The only two atypical features she bore. Good. She can man the upper turret if we get into trouble. Now, strap yourself in. I'm taking us out of here, said Venora, turning back to her controls and beginning the takeoff sequence, engines whining and spinning up as the two others took seats behind her and did as instructed. You are from Axum? Javona asked Combeer, gripping the safety restraints on her chair lightly as
and
the
that's
ship
implying
jerked
she's
and
not
began
from
to
it.
float up. Born and raised. What about you? He asked. She shook her head. Newer arrivals, me and my family. We were already running from Imperium. It had been hoped that with Axum being so big, we could escape. But it's been hard to go unnoticed. Javona admitted.
Forehead ridges.
You were already running? Where do you come from? Asked Combeer. Javona pointed up towards the sky in response. Was born on planet called Yevon Primiris. It was safe place for a time. Then come Skywatchers and Imperium. They take us all away, kill any who they notice are different.
How do they not kill
burn
you?
our planet
You have visible
and
ridges.
Leave it with nothing.
Hiding.
Normally is easy to hide, but with so many eyes on so few ships.
And they wouldn't know what the
she
Skywatch
said,
is, so they wouldn't get the
sorrow lacing
reference.
her voice. That's monstrous. Why would they do that? Combeer
Because
asked.
they are actually
Because
informed
they
about this one.
They fear my people and beliefs. They know Corpse God is lie, and that our gods are true. And so they kill us to try to stop them coming to us.
And accurately, because they are literally beacons.
She said, they fear your gods?
Accurately,
Who or
too.
what are your gods? Are they real things or just a belief?
Gene Stealers act like beacons the Tyranids home in on. But they're not in 40K anymore. So if they're in a separate universe, but they're still acting like a beacon, what would home in on them? Is there something out there that's getting a signal going like, what the fuck? That seems like he would lead in, because there was really... Maybe I'm reading into this too much.
Combeer asked, leaning in, interested. They reel! From between starfires they come, old and wise and true. Almost
Well,
we saw
some of
them,
them are old.
and one was with us always. Saw him with my own eyes. They reel, she insisted. Suddenly, there was beeping in the control console, and Javona jerked her head forward,
Tyranid
seeing a
worshippers.
thick, cigar-shaped ship of immense size falling through the atmosphere,
What?
though fairly distantly from them. Look alive, you two. We are getting an SOS from a large ship falling out of orbit.
What?
We may be needed for emergency help, said Venora. Javona watched
Oh!
as Combeer turned and looked at the controls he had access to,
Maybe they'll
typing
accidentally
away
kill
at them
her.
for a moment. This can't be right. Mom, that's a Confederate battlecruiser. What is it doing here? He said after a moment. Let's see if we can
What the
find
hell
out.
is going on? I don't know
Patching
if I
them
like
through
this.
now, she said. Static filled the cockpit speakers.
If I'm right, that should be
making
Ahsoka.
Javona clap her hands to her ears, the devices buzzing and churning for a time as a distant-sounding voice slowly came into focus and replaced them. This is Ahsoka Tano, acting commander of the 501st Clone Detachment. Repeat, this is Ahsoka Tano of the Galactic Republic.
Okay, I know it's kind of weird to say this, but it never occurred to me she was in charge of the 501st. I knew that there were clones there. In hindsight, it makes sense it would be the 501st because Anakin's involved, but I don't know. It just never occurred to me it would be that specific, very distinguishable unit.
We're going down and...
Also, fun thing about the 501st and why it's so distinguishable, it's actually a fan creation. Yeah, it was a fan creation, though, that was then adapted by Lucasfilms because they thought it was really funny. It was Vader's own unit that was initially a bunch of fans of Star Wars who would organize themselves externally to the franchise under 501. And then it got adopted into the actual unit within the universe itself. And frankly, I just find this hilarious.
I need support. Repeat, we are going down and need help angling our approach for an emergency landing. Any Republic forces, please respond. Javona had considerable trouble keeping up with the rapidly spoken Galactic Basic, far more fluent in the Imperial tongue, but understood enough to know that their help was needed. She looked to her rescuers,
What are they gonna do,
wondering
catch a
what they
ship?
would do now. There was a pause then,
Honestly,
as Combeer's mother looked
choosing the
back
right
at her
place to
son,
crash might be
and
best.
he to her. Combeer nodded, and she nodded back. I'll contact as many of the other ships as are willing to help. I'll put you through to that ship in a second, said Venora, Combeer taking a headset and removing his helmet, replacing it. Copy that, Ahsoka Tano. This is Combeer and the Resistance Fighters of Axum. We may not be the Republic forces you're calling for, but I think we're close enough.
Well, it
Ships
beats the
incoming
alternative.
to your location. Towing cables and tractor beams are prepped. If you have a particular landing location in mind, I suggest you send it to us now. We are going back to fight? Javona
Seems
asked
like it.
nervously, though neither of the two answered her, which was answer enough. And if that had not made it clear, the following broadcast did. Boy, am I glad to hear a friendly voice, forwarding our projected landing site. Fair warning, Resistance fighters, we are not done fighting, so we...
Honestly, I'm kind of surprised they're not trying to angle the ship into a hot zone, just take out some of the Imperials that way. I mean, it's not a bad option if you don't think you're going to survive the landing. Also, it's Ahsoka, so plot armor should probably survive the landing. Also, it just occurred to me, so Javona is definitely a gene stealer because, one, the image fan used, two, how come the Imperials, who are saved for death, didn't realize what she is and immediately take action? For the same reason most people in the Imperium don't immediately take action, because there's so many abhumans that they don't actually know what they're looking for. And since some planets actually believe aliens are a myth in 40K, and that is a canonical fact, because they never dealt with anyone who's not an abhuman or a human, they don't know that a gene stealer isn't just a normal abhuman. So they didn't think they're alien, except for here they would know they're alien. And that would explain why the Space Marines were mentioned, because it wasn't on Axum. It was back in the Star or the 40K side, because they were intentionally cleaning them out.
We plan to park this wreck right on top of them. Understood?
Oh, she is playing it angle towards
Combeer
them.
barely hesitated. Understood, Commander. Here's hoping they're grouped tight.
Oh, we're going back to the Bad Batch. Minus, Echo, I think? Yeah.
They've been chatting like that since they met.
Who's
Crosshair
chatting?
grated. Yeah, and? Wrecker asked, walking alongside and just in front of the tall sniper. It's unnatural. Crosshair hissed.
Who's
Wrecker
chatting?
looked at him and then forward to the two who were leading their group. They were not loud and did not seem to be slowing them down. The murmur of their voices had been near constant from the moment Tech and Quo 84 had begun speaking. Crosshair had used his comm to listen in on their gabbing, but found their conversation to be all but indecipherable. And not because the two were speaking in some other language, or using a dialect or jargon that was outside his understanding, at least for the most part. No, Crosshair could follow the words and meanings of their speech,
Tech
but could not,
and the
for
call
the life
fanboy
of him, locate a central theme or reasoning behind their conversation. The two appeared to be going back and forth, one delighting the other with seemingly random trivia, only barely related to the trivia that had preceded it. So,
we're watching a nerd off, aren't we? Oh, god damn it, fan.
I was made to somehow create a baseline M-wave receiver without even an iota of Temerite or to boost the signal, Quo was saying. An M-wave receiver without anything to conduct that kind of wavelength. It seems to me that he was trying to cause you to fail, Tech replied. Quo nodded his head emphatically. Indeed, I also suspect that was the case. But I foiled that plan by using the battery casing itself to bolster the signal. Granted, it only worked after you let it heat up for a few minutes before using, but it was done in the end, the droid man said proudly. Fascinating use of recombinant ideology. I myself am quite the recombinator. We performed a delicate data extraction from Raxus Prime earlier in the war. Things did not turn out exactly as planned.
Less people died than you thought.
Inside a Veridium mine. The brainy clone explained. Oh, Veridium! I haven't heard of that ore, but it sounds volatile. The red-robed droid man interjected. Extremely. Any blaster fire inside the tunnel risked a full-scale Veridium meltdown. I almost had to yank.
I just have this thought in the back of my head that if the call fanboy was allowed to just peacefully integrate into the Star Wars side, he could accidentally do more damage than all of the invasion plans right now. Because anyone who thinks call is the right choice is going to do a lot of stupid shit. Call gets away with it due to plot armor. Like Jedi levels of plot armor. And also because he's such a fun character that you kind of want him to survive just to see what kind of dumb shit someone else can think of for him to do. In the same way you want Erebus to die, but also you want to be the next person to write him doing something so incredibly evil that you're just sitting there going like, what the fuck, man? He's a good character to do those kind of things.
Crosshair's rifle out of his hands to keep him from atomizing us out of habit. And that was not all. Veridium is also highly radio absorbent, blocking out our comms and leaving us without any way to signal for help. However, I realized that with controlled detonations, I could cause a radioactive feedback loop along the seams of the mine, Tech said.
Okay, Tech aside, a radioactive feedback loop is literally a nuclear explosion. That is what a feedback loop, anything radioactive is. Technically, radioactive isn't just nuclear radiation as we kind of know it in the parlance. It would technically include things like light because it is all part of the radio electric spectrum or electromagnetic spectrum, which includes radiation and light and radio waves and microwaves and gamma rays, beta waves, whatever. But this is one of those things when you get into tech jargon, they throw out a lot of words that sound right, but you have no idea what they actually mean. And some people, if they're consistent about it, form their entire methodologies within fictional universes of how they work. But then as soon as you know anything about what these words actually mean and you hear them combined, it's like, oh my God, you started the car by plugging the spark into the gas tank. It's that level of, oh, fuck. And probably just as successful.
And cause a signal bolstering radiation burst born on energetic ion waves. Quo completed. Precisely.
Wait, do they not know what nuclear explosions are in Star Wars Galaxy? Maybe that was found accurately describing exactly what he just wanted to do, but since they don't use the same technology, it never occurred to them to describe it as a nuclear explosion. That would be interesting.
Obviously, Crosshair and I were eating anti-radiation supplements for the next 2 months after. but it got the message across. Almost deafened Hunter, in fact. Wrecker
So he just
smirked as
casually
marched
nuked
behind
them.
only catching scratches of the rapidly moving topics. I don't know. I think it's kinda cute. Tech finally made a friend who's as excited about useless stuff as he is, said the larger clone, punctuating the words with a laugh. You won't think it's so cute if they don't take us where we need to go. Crosshair growled. Well, where else would they be taking us? Wrecker asked. The sniper shrugged, hidden face scowling. On a tour of the fragging ship, for starters, he grumbled. As if sensing the soft-spoken criticism, Quo turned back towards the two in the rear and indicated toward the door in the hallway not far from where they strode. Fear not, friends. Our destination lies just ahead. It won't be long now, he said. When they came close to the doors, it became obvious that they were far more reinforced than the majority of the other similar doors they had already come across.
Also, Fan did answer my question about nuclear technology being in Star Wars, because he mentioned that in canon lore, that was a Mandalorian tactic to nuke planets from orbit. During the Crusades, even. Which are so far in the past that there's a good chance people don't actually remember it, because they've moved on and it's so ancient that it's now a new technology again. Kind of like how it would work in the Imperium. It's so old that it technically would be new if anyone found it.
Quo approached without hesitation, extending out his tendrils and interfacing with the gate's mechanisms. And then, time began to tick by. First 1 minute, then 2, and then 3 minutes passed, with the clones only growing antsier and antsier as they were made to wait in the hallway, weapons out and swiveling. How long is this going to take, Hunter? At this point, we might as well just serve ourselves up to the imps. Crosshair hissed. Oh, don't worry about that. It's highly unlikely they will find us now. There really shouldn't be many people wandering the ship at this point, said Tech. What? Why? Crosshair followed up. Tech blinked, head tilting. Obviously because the warp breach alarm has been triggered.
What?
Most of the ship's inhabitants will be inside bunkers and wooded shelters
Warp
by
breach?
now, if not preemptively cramming themselves inside of escape pods, Tech said. Crosshair scowled at that. Obviously? What's so obvious about any of that? What?
What would a warp breach look like on the Star Wars side? In the Imperium side, it's horrible because you're sent into the warp, which is a bad option. In the Star Wars side, Fan has established that there are demon-like entities within the Force, because they did possess the clones. But I'm not sure if that was a holdover from the Star Wars side infecting or I guess a holdover from the 40K side infecting the Star Wars side, or if that is something that was naturally in the Star Wars side infecting the clones to make them basically corn berserkers. Or is it that they happen to exist already? Or is it going to be something where if they're suddenly spat into the warp without any protection, it's actually not as evil because it's a much more staid, peaceful place? I don't know. It would actually be kind of cool to see what surviving, getting tossed into the warp as an explosion would do to someone because, well, we don't know what it would look like. I don't think there's many cases where you get to go into the Force in Star Wars, but since it's being put as the warp equivalent through this story, it would have something that you could go into. Theoretically, at least. Would a warp breach even be as catastrophic? I don't know. I really don't.
What is a warp breach, and why aren't we hiding from it? And how the frag would I know any of that? Crosshair spat. Calm down, Crosshair. I simply assumed that you had been listening in on me and Quo. He is quite insightful, and explained all of that several minutes ago. Though I'm still not sure what a warp tear is exactly.
Oh, a warp tear. Oh, when they said warp breach, I thought they meant that they were actually about to have an explosion and it would be sent into the warp. And people are commenting, this is Anakin and Kaon getting out and they're causing a massive warp explosion because Psyker. Okay, that makes more sense.
I do understand that it has to do with their FTL drives, and that it's quite dangerous. But I don't think I have to explain why we can't go into the shelters with the Imperials right now. Tech was saying
No,
before
hurry
a
it up,
loud mechanical squeal cut him off,
Granted,
drawing all
running
of
into
their
K-On! is probably just as
attentions back to
dangerous
the
for you
door.
as, an actual
Quo
explosion.
stepped back and away from it, the
Actually,
many
probably more so.
locks creaking and cracking open as the bars around it slid back and away. Soon, the passage was clear and open before them.
Dude. I need to watch The Bad Batch because this is an incredibly epic picture. Also, people are mentioning the hyperspace horrors because hyperspace is basically the location of the Force, at least in this instance. And you know what? I actually forgot about a lot of those things because there are some things I've actually seen a bit about, Generation Tech, for example, that go into a lot of information about the hyperspace horrors that have been listed throughout much of Star Wars' decades-long run. And goddamn, are they terrifying. Still more peaceful than the warp in 40K, but only because it's just that much worse.
Tech began to move forward, but Hunter halted him with an extended hand. "Hold on, Tech. I'll take point. Cover me," he said, eyes finding Crosshairs and giving the barest nod. Crosshair returned it and subtly angled his rifle to aim at Quo's back. Tech nodded and stood back, pistols drawn to cover Hunter, as the sergeant stalked inside, past the lip of the door, and looked around. A little time passed before Hunter radioed the others. I think you will all want to see this. Especially you, Tech," he said. Shrugging, the others filed in, Crosshair taking up the rear behind Quo as they entered into the room. The chamber was both massively large and densely packed with all manner of computers, devices, and instruments. And
considering what 40K computers are made of, this is a wet workshop.
in the center of it all, half dismantled and clearly being studied, was the bomb itself. "Whoa!" Wrecker gasped excitedly.
Damn!
"Wait, isn't that supposed to be back on a Naxxus?"
Not
Crosshair
anymore.
asked. Hunter nodded. "It is. If it's here, then what exactly is keeping a Naxxus in line under Imperial control?" The sergeant wondered aloud.
Murder?
The threat of the bomb appears to have been enough, as long as the people believe it's still there.
Really? The bomb was what was keeping everyone in line? I thought what was keeping everyone in line, unless you're talking about the Separatists. No, because they're not on the Separatist ship anymore. I thought the thing keeping the people in line was the literal legions of murder that were, and I quote, murdering people. I honestly thought that was it.
Then it might as well be. After all, most of the power behind a bomb this large isn't in its actual detonation,
Really?
but in the threat of it. Or at least, so it would appear.
How big is
The
this bomb?
words
Because I thought it was a
gave
planet
Hunter
killer.
a devious idea. "Let's put that to the test then. Tech, Quo, can you two get this bomb
Are they stealing the
operational again
planet killer
quickly?"
bomb?
The two looked at each other and then at the bomb before nodding and
Did he
quickly
actually-
test then. "Tech, Quo, can you two get this bomb operational again quickly?"
And not
two
start the
looked
timer?
at each other and then at the bomb before nodding in unison.
Oh my
It
God.
should not be a problem, though we will need the aid of a lifter servitor, Quo 84 said. "No
Wrecker?
need," Tech replied. "We've got something, or rather someone,
Wrecker.
better," he said with a
God.
smile. Wrecker stalked forward then, laughing as he put his gun away and clapped his large hands together. "You bet you do. I'm way, way better at lifting than Trashy ever was."
I'm getting so many Ogren vibe from him, including the big gun, huge weapon, nice vibe. And admittedly, I completely empathize with it.
The huge clone said amiably. "But, Hunter, why do we even want this thing operational?
Big
Wasn't our
boom.
mission to disable it?" Crosshair asked.
Ah, you can also steal
Hunter
it.
turned and grinned. "Exactly. And there isn't a bomb that's more disabled than one we've already set off.
He's
as
not
far
wrong.
As I'm concerned, this
I mean, most demolitions experts, they don't actually turn off a bomb and take it apart. They just put it in a location where the explosion won't hurt anyone and they minimize the effect and then explode it because you don't need to worry about it going off if it's already going off. So technically, he is doing Demolitions 101. Keep it safe until you can get rid of it someplace where explosion won't matter.
ship is as good a place as any to set it off," he said. "Doesn't anyone here think he might have an issue with that?" Crosshair asked, indicating towards Quo. The others looked at him as well, and he paused and looked behind himself before realizing he was truly the subject of their scrutiny. I have few friends on this ship, and those I do have do not plan to remain much longer. In fact,
He has friends on the ship? Of course, there'd be more Call fanboys than just him. Oh, my God.
fully intend to depart with them before this is done. We are not far from where I need to meet them. If I aid you in this, may I be released from your escort and, as Call would say, go our separate ways?
Honestly, you probably should go with him. It's safer for you.
Bad idea, said Crosshair. Hunter paused for a moment, rubbing his chin. Tech, check the work when it's all done. If it all looks right, then yeah, you can go. I don't really understand what kind of power struggle you are involved in, but if this war has taught me anything, it's that the enemy of my enemy, Hunter began to say, is my friend. That is also one of Call's sayings. Or
Oh, of course, Call took credit for that one. Or even better, if he didn't take credit for it, but no one else remembers anyone else saying it. I don't even... I'm sorry. I just absolutely love how the entire power structure, the first actual internal conflict that's happening, or more specifically, has already happened, is just the Call fanboys versus everyone else, because Call is great. And everyone else going like, why the fuck are you like this? Just be normal. Oh my gosh. Oh.
At least when I've heard him repeat ad nauseum.
Yeah.
Sergeant, I agree, said Quo. Then get to work, both of you. Crosshair and I will cover the entrance. Let me know when you are done.
The Sister Legatine. Ooh, Sister Legatine. So we're going back to the Battle Sisters. Probably fighting against the reinforcements that just arrived from the Star Wars side.
Sister Legatine, Raina Ordain, spiraled down and away from the
I'm not actually sure what
falling
I'm looking
heretic
at.
gunship, her jump pack sputtering and spitting flames and thrust, but doing so in weakening bursts. The packs were not meant for true, sustained flight, and she had already tested hers to the limit during her bout with the alien witch. Controlling her own fall, she burned down towards the ground at speeds which would have pulped the flesh of a normal human, colliding with the metal avenue in a shower of shimmering fragments and fire. Her armor compensated for the impact with a loud, mechanical hiss. And she stood from her landing crouch almost without pause, seeing that the armor of the clones she had landed on had not protected their frail bodies as her blessed plate had done for her.
Damn.
Sword held aloft, she cut through the smoke to strike the stunned survivors of the squad she had fallen upon. First one, and then the other. But as soon as she cut down those nearest her, the spire winds blew away the smoke around her, revealing a grouped mass of 40 clones.
Damn! Also, this entire scene right now just reminds me that the one model I want out of 40K right now would be a Canoness or a Palatine with a jetpack, because it would be so freaking cool if you had that. I just look at this, that's... It's something the model range is missing, because right now all of the main units who aren't Celestine or on a giant flying pulpit are ground units, and I would love if they had more flying options, because that's freaking cool, man.
They held grenade and missile launchers, weapons they had trained on her from the moment she saw them. She grit her teeth, her face tightening as her life once more met the razor's edge, pivoting towards the group and raising her sword. They fired. Raina knew that she did not have enough power left in her pack to fly away into safety, but knew also that it was not fully expended, not yet. Even now, the energy cells of her power suit's generator were helping to bolster the jump pack, which was mounted over it. But, even so, it would take her precious seconds to emulate flight once more, seconds she simply did not have.
So she's fighting until she can jump away.
Instead,
and there's 40
she
guys aiming
charged,
guns.
Eyes tracking the missiles, and noting that they were joined by arching mortars as well.
Well, look on the upside. Once you get into close combat, no one can shoot you in that, so it's fine. Combat rules are funny.
Munition salvos set to break her apart like an egg struck with firecrackers. But while her pack lacked the power to carry her far into the air, it did have enough strength stored up to launch her forward and to the left.
Assisted
An action
assault
she waited
jumps.
until the
Oh
very
my
last
God.
second to perform, throwing herself just out of the way of the streaking projectiles, which curved in an attempt to follow her, but too late. The missiles collided into the street behind her, and the sudden overlapping explosions which followed as a result of the raining mortars only seemed to help propel her forward and closer to the clones. They fired again, and then a third time, each time finding their weapons just barely evaded by the last-second rocket sprints of the sister, which carried her into their number like a bullet flying into a body. The aftermath of the impact was bloody and lethal, with Raina's voice ringing out in clear song as she lopped away limbs.
Is she singing while she's cutting people up?
And divided faces and halves,
Yeah, of course
turning
she is.
living resistance into pacified death.
I don't know why, but in my head, I have her singing Down with the Sickness. Just because she's flying down on them, that's where my mind's going. And at this point, sure, why not? It wouldn't be the weirdest thing I've imagined. Oh my God. Also, the people asking about my time, I'm pretty good right now. I got another hour until it's an issue. Hopefully, I can finish the video in that time, but honestly, with how much I geek out over fans writing, it's debatable. I might be able to push it a little. If you hear any banging, that's actually probably the cats trying to get in. You can't see it because it's off screen, but there have been little furry paws sticking under the door trying to get in the entire time, and it's adorable because the warm room is something they like. Unfortunately, they chew on wires that could kill them, so I can't let them in. But they're also adorable.
The clone formation broke apart around her, and those which did not flee were mercilessly shown the Emperor's peace. And soon, all that remained of that skirmish was the Sister Legatine and the pile of bodies she stood atop. Looking around, she was somewhat relieved to find the battle lines falling back and away from her position
40 clones?
as
It's nothing.
Imperial forces began to push back the Republican advance. Thanks to the sudden aid provided by their reinforcements and the flanking positions those reinforcements had chosen to take up when entering the battle,
So other people
the
entered the battle
heretical
as well,
forces
okay.
of endless clones had not just been stalled, but nearly decapitated. The spear of their forward assault dissolving into disorganized chaos
Oh, this was
all
the
around
counterattack,
her.
yeah.
To their credit, the enemy soldiers did not rout, forming into clumps of stubborn resistance which were gradually being surrounded by advancing Vastillan irregulars, who then took them apart until none remained standing. The Vasties had taken a brutal beating in defense of the approach to the Basilica, and despite their reputation as a more tepid, cautious force of guardsmen, they seemed more than eager to repay their losses back to the unyielding Replique warriors, showing no quarter and no lack of haste as they took back ground while simultaneously taking their lives. And now they were not alone, joined by the silent forward march of the Carcosan Untouchables.
So is the Carcosans,
most of whom
then.
had massed to the left and right of the opposing forces.
Yep.
Those few untouchables which had arrived in the center of the field took up shock rolls, hitting the forward-facing enemies hard and without consideration for personal losses. With their additions to the battle, it seemed the surprise assault and assassination-born sabotage of the Republic had finally yielded its last advantages.
Really? Oh, okay, no. I thought, wait, why did they assassinate anyone on the Star Wars side? But then no, she was talking about the assassination the Republic did to the Imperium side. Okay, I got that a little confused for some reason. I was like, wait, did I miss something? Just because it's me, I usually do miss things, so I kind of figured I had. But no, I got up with that one.
And Imperial grit and faith was now making the difference. The thoughts were nearly enough to bring a bristling
also,
smile
having a bunch of
to
Sisters
her
of Battles
face.
murdering everything does
But
help.
the sudden trembling within the earth curtailed her joy. Her auspex picked it up first, but it was not long before she felt it as well. Evidently, the Republic Replique felt whatever this approaching force was as well, as their groups, clumps, lines, and formations began to dissolve, launching themselves into assaults on the flanking buildings.
Is this what I think it is? It looks like we're about to get a night to the face. You can even say a night to remember.
Please
let it be this. Please let it be this.
They vacated the wide street. And then she saw them.
What?
At first, Raina had thought she was
it's the
witnessing the
tanks.
approach of large, low-flying starships, the likes of which she had seen before during their invasion. The repulsive, artificial gravity technology mastered by the aliens allowed them to create utterly impractical designs to fly through the air and hover at will.
Yeah.
And she mistook the tanks for such craft, only realizing her error as it became clearer and clearer that these vessels were speeding, not on cushions of air and technology, but on 10 gargantuan spinning wheels. Forward forces! Incoming heretic super heavy support is inbound on the main approach! Brace for impact! She yelled through her Vox relay, metal shards crunching and screeching underfoot as she dashed to the smoking wreckage of one of the trundling, walking Republic tanks, taking cover behind it just as these new enormous tanks began to fire. First came
This is the predecessor of the AT-AT, isn't it? Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Oh my god.
volleys upon
Who's the first person to try and
missile
melee it?
sprays, most of which were directed into the battle
Probably the
lines of her
Carcosans.
fellow
No.
sisters.
It's probably everyone.
Thanks to her warning, many had taken cover ahead of the sudden assault. But for too many, the warning had not come soon enough, or the cover they had chosen was simply insufficient. But the true devastation began when the many heavy plasma particle turrets which were mounted on these behemoths began to open fire.
I wish these were in the movies
Additional
more.
sprays of death emerged, this time in the form of wide blue blaster bolts which hammered into the Vestellan and Carcosan lines, cutting them down with frightening efficiency. Those few sisters
Giant
that
weapons
found
do it.
themselves in the line of fire for those Azure weapons fared little better. For these weapons were clearly of a wholly different caliber than the handheld blasters the Replica had been using before. Only exacerbating the matters, the huge tanks were speeding at nearly 80 miles an hour.
Damn!
And they did not stop.
I mean, I
when
know
they
actual tanks
collided
can do
with
that,
the
but these are
foremost
huge.
ranks of the Imperium's soldiers. Raina found herself crying out in fear and fury as one of the assault tanks drove straight over where she huddled, crushing and denting the ruined walker under 5 successive metallic wheels, each large enough to smash her flat.
Damn.
She covered her head as the walker corpse above her crinkled and bent, its metal screaming under the strain, but remaining intact enough that she was still whole and not smashed like an insect by the time the speeding, wheeled fortress had passed overhead. Those tanks took back the Republic's ground in brutal fashion. Their
Yeah, that
thick
would do
hull
it.
plating throwing back very nearly everything the Imperium threw into them, and shrugging off what weapons fire managed to actually stick. When they finally stopped advancing, hatches and ramps deployed from each of the 3 leading vehicles, 300 fresh Replica heretics emerging from each.
How many in total are there then, if it's 300 from each? Also, the 300 clothes coming out of it are probably less scary than the giant-ass machine, but they gotta fill in the gap somewhere, and it's still more firepower, but goddamn!
The troopers immediately re-engaging the stunned Imperial soldiers with alien battle cries and weapons fire. And to add dismay to Raina's already growing rage, she felt the rumbling had not stopped, even after they had arrived, and looking
More?
back down the avenue, saw 3 more of such tanks rapidly
So
approaching
4 total?
their already
No, more than that.
haphazard battle lines. A chime from her armor declared her jump pack fully charged,
Well,
and
she can get
not
up.
a moment too soon. Win or lose, death or divinity, Raina did not doubt her purpose for a second, even if she did doubt the likelihood of her success.
Is she actually gonna melee this
These were
thing?
monsters which threatened to turn back the
She's going to
loyal and
melee the tank.
faithful. And to such monsters, she was doom incarnate.
God.
Raina ordained charge.
I mean, it worked for
down
Luke
the
Skywalker.
avenue, the fresh fight at her back, angling herself towards one of the approaching behemoth tanks. Missiles were
I'm a
fired,
melee it.
some even at her. And she again waited until the very last moment before activating her jump jets sailing high into the sky and arching down towards the command bridge of the tank she had chosen.
Oh my god.
Using every last iota of her brain power to calculate her impact point, she threw her still-powered sword through the front of the vehicle and curled herself into a ball, throwing herself at full speed towards the viewing window of thick, transparent steel which crowned the command center. The impact jarred her, nearly tearing her left arm from her socket.
Is she gonna break in, though?
And numbing her right leg as her body burst into the tank in a shower of glass like...
She actually managed to break through the glass window. You know, considering this has actually happened in Star Wars canon where things have broken through windows, it's not actually that weird. They really need to work on that. Apparently it's a big problem.
Substance and ceramite chips.
They were not expecting this.
Did not doubt that, had her sword not weakened the wide, transparent viewing port, she would have done little more than collide like an insect against their windshield. Raina tried to rise, but staggered, servos whining and sputtering.
I mean, they're probably more surprised than you are.
The uniformed command crew of the tank blinked in utter shock at the collapsed figure which had shattered her way into their midst.
They're probably wondering if she's still alive.
Anything as seconds hung suspended in the air like frozen rain. But that pause ended as one of the commanding clones drew his sidearm and began discharging into the Imperial warrior. His actions prompting the other officers to do the same, drawing blaster pistols and firing into her. The bolts pinged and sizzled into her splintered armor, filling her with the sense of being pelted by heavy, boiling rain, which gradually superheated her shell, even scalding and burning her through the seams. Discarding her reliance on mechanical muscles, she hauled herself up with a strained growl of effort, throwing herself against the nearest clone, grasping and pulling free her weapon which was embedded in the floor near her.
Also, fun thing, considering how hot they're describing her armor, just grabbing the clone right now, the physical contact counts as a weapon in its own right. Because that is so hot that her armor is literally burning her where it can get through. So the clone is probably really glad they're in full armor right now. I have no idea how good they are with temperature, though. Is it a thing? Sure. How much? I have no idea.
Sword impaling the man's chest with barely a strain, his eyes wide, mouth agape, and spewing blood as she pulled the blade out of him through the side of his punctured chest. But she was no longer looking at him, finding her next target and lurching in his direction, screaming in pain as the heat within her suit began to grow near intolerable. The next man she beheaded, kicking the head into the face of another clone as she went for the third kill, cutting the arms off the next assailant, jump jets burning to fill the...
Did she literally just disarm him? It's a Star Wars thing. You want to take care of someone, you get rid of their arms. But goddamn, is it living down to the meme? Oh my god.
Space with smoke as she tried to provide some sort of concealment for herself. Without helmets or armor of their own, the clone officers were easy prey to her auspex, which guided her through the smoke.
Oh, so that's still working.
Them in turn, even as they continued to...
Okay, I was actually under the impression for some reason her head was on armor because of the image fan chose, but yeah, okay, that makes more sense. And people are pointing out these are tank crews. They weren't wearing armor. I didn't realize clones ever were out of that if they had a choice. Like, no matter what the role is. I thought they just kind of always had it on. I don't know why I believe that. In hindsight, there's literally no reason to believe that. But I did.
Shoot after her, following the glow of her blade to try to keep their bead. But their uniforms and sidearms were a bad matchup, even for a crippled sister. She slammed her elbow into the wall beside the hatch that led down into the rest of the vehicle, a blood-strewn mire stretching out behind her. Raina pushed air from between her teeth, gritting them in a cage of enameled bone as she pushed through the heat, searing pain and bruises she had earned from her latest assault. Though the command deck had seemed vacated, the tank did not stop its movement or attack. Grunting in frustration, she stabbed her blade into the wall, unholstering a bolt pistol from her hip and spinning on her heel, unloading the gun into the nearby consoles, bursting and blowing them all apart. Yet, even this did nothing to slow or stall the Republic war machine. But she also resolved to not be slowed or stalled by this either.
Bigger gun?
She would stop this monster, even if she had to tear out its guts from the inside.
I mean, effective. It's literally how Luke Skywalker took out an AT-AT in melee, so there's a precedent for it. Although the precedent hasn't happened yet.
She retrieved her sword and slammed her fist against the door control panel. It squealed open in response, revealing the white-helmed face of a trooper who was about to enter.
And he's in armor, though.
Raina roared into his face as she pushed her blade through the stunned false man and into the replique behind him, triggering her blade's power field to flare as she slid the sword out, bursting both of them apart. Blue blaster bolts chased and collided with her through the misting gore which coated either wall in the cramped space. There was no room to evade or maneuver in this thing, so she did not bother to try. Charging through the shots, Shoulder leading the way as she tackled the troopers attempting to impede her in the narrow hallway. Raina crushed white armor with the power of squealing, struggling servos.
Damn.
Before turning about
How strong
and
is her power
lopping
armor?
down with her blue sword's glowing blade. The Sister Legatine discarded Grace.
No, seriously, now I think about it, just how powerful is her power armor? That is... If her armor is strong enough that she could squeeze someone and the armor actually goes, that means that there's more power than the armor... Wait, no. Is clone armor made more for a specific type and it's maybe not as physically durable? I don't know. It feels like that's something I would have known and maybe just forgot. But goddamn.
Embracing brutality as she hacked and chopped through armor and flesh.
I mean, if it works.
Striking the walls to either side with each attack and leaving long, melting furrows in her wake. A clone tackled her in return, ramming the barrel of his gun into her shoulder joint as he did, screaming as he fired. Her right shoulder seized up at this and was filled with blinding pain. She used that pain to
she could still feel it, though.
Which shoved the man back, following that up by punching into him with her left arm, her blade slipping from her right hand's fingers and embedding itself in the floor. Her gauntleted strike broke every rib in the man's chest, dropping him to the ground, wheezing and dying. The soldiers behind her opened fire, and she barely shielded her face from the deathly blue volley, raising her left arm to defend herself as she tried to work some kind of feeling into her right arm. Raina was roasting alive and screamed her pain and fury as she charged forward again, ramming into the closest replique, knocking he and his brothers back and over, though she found herself falling over with them. The close-range blasting devolved into a brutal grappling melee, the clones attempting to use their numbers against her.
On the other hand, power armor.
They tried to pin her down,
One-armed
to put their
power
weight
armor.
over her as they shoved their guns into the seams of her armor. Blaster barrels seeking
they figure
to
out
press
how to
against
fight in
any
close
part
combat.
of her skin or face. But the searing pain from those attempts only fueled her fury, her rage
Dear
becoming
God.
the death song of all she faced.
This is literally an example of someone rolling all the sixes on the Shield of Faith right now. Dear God, man.
Within the main body of the troop-carrying compartment, clones listened to the struggle occurring behind the doors which led into them. Angling
This still has the
blasters,
troops in there.
listening to the hymns of death and the cries of
Because
fleeting
is she
life
still
which
singing? I
almost
thought she was
certainly
screaming.
belonged to their brothers. And then, silence. They waited, braced into overlapping fields of fire, at least as much as the cramped confines would allow them. When the doors slid open, they revealed only inky darkness, the lights in the corridor having been destroyed in the fight. "Sergeant?" one of the clones called.
So help me. I know it's not a blue or I know it's not a red power sword, but just for this instant, just can Fan maybe just make a small little plot hole and say that when she turns on her power sword, it's red? Because we have the scene right now. You know what I mean. If you don't, it's the best scene out of Rogue One. But goddamn, he is literally setting it up perfectly. Just that entire slowly turning on the red field, as that is the first thing to illuminate that, and the black armored figure standing over all the dead in the background. Just, oh my, he's literally setting up the perfect call out to the best moment of Rogue One. Vader being a badass.
In response, two double fist-sized cylindrical objects bounced out of the shadows, landing at the feet of the waiting clones. Grenade! The nearest clone began to call, but the explosives had been cooked and provided him no more time than that. They detonated, one expelling smoke and glittering, blinding flares, while the other combusted into a raining fireball of burning, searing phosphor, the purifying substance spreading out like the wings of a merciless phoenix. Its avian cry carried on the sudden frantic screams of the troopers who felt its touch. Blinded by light, smoke, and fire, they were unprepared to carry out their planned defense as the avatar of the Emperor's intolerance made itself known through the divine instrument that was Raina Ordain.
Is that Fan just giving her extra epaulets, or is that an actual title she has? Either way, it's weird for the clones' perspective to be the ones to say that, considering I don't think they have enough context at this point to say that about her, other than the, oh my god, what the fuck? I'm not going to say anything because it seems like their part is about to wrap up, but at the same time, it doesn't make sense for the clone perspective to have that information. Still cool, though.
Minutes later, the Juggernaut would cease its offensive action.
Unless this is said from her perspective, even though they jumped into theirs.
Going silent. It was surrounded by fellow Juggernaut tanks who, even then, not only fired into the enemy positions, but...
Wait, now are we jumping to the perspective of the tanks? Fan's doing the thing where he jumps around perspectives rather than sticking with Raina in this one. It's not a wrong way to write. I just don't like it.
Opened their disembarkation ramps, releasing their hordes of hundreds of replicae into the front line of the battle. The troopers of the Republic had expected to see the same emerge from this tank as well, forming up for the continuing forward march. But when the ramp came down, the first thing to emerge was blood, smoke, and the diced, burnt remains of the men who had died too.
Did she just kill the 300 people in the tank? God damn, lady!
Close to the exit, pools of red flowed down as
I think she has the kill
black
streak.
Were belched out and up. The rolling trundle of a severed, still-helmed head, and the awkward downward flopping roll of a dismembered white limb were joined by the staggered, limping steps of Sister Raina, who emerged, clutching her sword in her left hand, her hair and armor thickly matted with the blood of just over 300 clone troopers. Smoking from every inch, one eye closed against the searing burn, Raina turned to spitefully regard the clones who gawked at her emergence from the slain tank. Her armor hummed and strained, barely able...
In terms of her versus a Jedi, I'm actually surprised the Jedi didn't die now, considering the last time a Jedi had to fight 300 clones, a lot fewer of them killed most of the Jedi.
Able to keep up with her desired movements now, dragged after her with each plodding attempt she made to approach. All she could do was stand, unbowed, and glare at them, an omen of their futility. She could not even raise her sword properly any longer, not even in her good arm. But she showed the surrounding enemy no fear. Instead, when they lifted their blaster barrels towards her, she faced them with a defiant, monstrous glare and roared her battle cry. Though she could not do more than just that. And yet, she needed no more than that. No more at all. It was as if her call had heralded doom itself.
What?
For as she let loose her final cry, the steel earth around her seemed to scream back at them, expanding and bursting apart in fiery detonations which scattered the clones present with the force of surprise
Who's
and
firing
deadly
now?
power. Several replicae still managed to send shots up at Raina, which made her grunt as they seared her and impacted onto her chest plate, cracking the already worn down and scorched ceramite as she fell back against the ramp. The sound of battle surrounded her then, and, most notably, the squeal and sigh of mechanical legs, and the deep-throated thrums of vehicle-scaled grenade launchers. A form loomed over her, and it jerked suddenly as she became aware of it, her eyes blinking rapidly to make it out.
Who interrupted?
A man with a scarred face, a young man. He was in a black uniform, and, to her relief, he was clearly an Imperial soldier. Raina was so relieved, she almost did not release the sudden vice grip she had seized the man with, having wrapped her armored left.
Considering how powerful her power armor is, seizing someone's hand is a good way to cast I don't think you need hand anymore.
Hand fingers around his throat without realizing it.
God, she immediately got his
winced
throat.
and let him go, and he rubbed his neck and grimaced,
Murder
but
impulse.
reached down to help her up. Luckily, they were not alone. Several other similarly dressed men crowding around her to pull her up into their arms, helping to support her copious weight once they managed to drag her upright.
Who just interrupted?
She looked around through hazy eyes as sentinel walkers fought around them, temporarily driving the soldiers back and away while larger munitions.
I don't think it's 1313, but it would be hilarious if it was 1313, just accidentally building a harem. I don't think he is, but it would be funny if it was interpreted that way.
Fired from weapons she could not see, collided with the super heavy Republic tanks. That seemed to keep them occupied as they carried her away to a waiting Chimera transport, and the sister Hospitaller waiting inside.
What? Let's just survive that.
What regiment? She groaned the nearest man, the man who had found her first. He smiled devilishly at her, seemingly unconcerned with her nearly breaking his neck earlier.
Yeah.
The young man was actually quite handsome, or would have been past the 4 raking lines which marked his whole face from one diagonal to the other. Black Arminians, 44th Obsidian Guard, here to do the Emperor's work, he said. And as she was carried away, she saw that he spoke truly, as the sound of crunching tank treads, booming Leman Russ turrets, and the rumble and roar of something far deeper and far larger entered into her senses. Rest easy, sister. Faith and fury may sustain the fight, but our guns will end it, he said. There was an air-shattering blast
irony.
then, one which sent the wind whipping and screeching about them, making the Hospitaller flinch back, though the Black Carminians did not even
What were they
twitch.
expecting?
Sister Raina Ordain watched from over the soldier's shoulder as the entire head and half the body of a Republic turbo tank seemed to simply vanish, rent apart by the supersonic passage of the solid shells which had sailed through it.
We
The
getting the
man
super heavies?
was still smiling. Our very big guns.
What? Oh, dude. Okay, one, I think I did have enough time, and hey, I'm not actually late. I have plenty of time. I'm going to keep telling myself that, even though this is literally the limit of exactly when I needed to stop. Oh. Oh, man. I feel like I should know that last character, but I think the Black Harmonians were mentioned, but we haven't got any characters from them yet, so I don't think I missed anyone. That said, if there's one thing I want out of this, it's that I need to go and get more sisters with flight packs, because I don't have them. I avoid them because I hate the flight bases, but maybe if I buy them and I could just pick up some custom flight packs off Etsy, because goddamn, Raina was so freaking cool, man. Oh, Ben, you made a really interesting character there. It's not that she did the, I'm going to run in there and kill everyone and do everything. It's that initial, well, this is probably suicide. Fuck it, gotta do it anyways. And then somehow manages to come through it in horrible shape. Beat to shit. Probably with an arm that's going to be metal in the next round. But goddamn. Oh, this was just... I knew about some things. I knew there would be a sister when I was looking for various thumbnails. I did not know the entire Gene Stealer plotline was coming up. That was a surprise. But the second they said Purple Ridges, man, oh dear God. Also, I thought most of the female ones were depicted at Game Workshop as being magos, so they might be psychic. Also, the entire idea that most of the Gene Stealers are at least to some extent psychic because they are actual beacons in the warp. I wonder how that's going to work out. I actually don't know. Either way, if you guys haven't already, there's a link below to the original video. Hit it up. And I'm going to try something. Apparently, if I say, don't forget to like and subscribe to the video, it should do something where the actual AI running whatever YouTube does now makes the subscribe button light up and flash. I don't know if that's true or not, and I'm not sure if it happens on a live stream, but I find it funny. So let me know if it actually did that, because that's actually kind of amusing if I could say something and the screen starts flashing completely unrelated to that. I know I'm geeking out over tech stuff, but on a writing level, this is a really good transition chapter. We have a big reveal right in the middle with the Imperials being shown as the bad guys until it's revealed that they should have started that barbecue a little bit faster because Gene Stealers, man. Admittedly, they shouldn't have actually tried to kill her with everyone else. They should have immediately done it. There is okay, Gene Stealer, if you know what you're dealing with, it isn't alive. Yeah. Also, considering that there are implications that Tyranids existed in the 40K galaxy prior to their discovery and their invasions of the Hive Fleets, I do wonder if Gene Stealers were part of the reason that people had the anti-alien bias because of previous interactions with them during maybe the Golden Era. That would be really funny if it turns out the Gene Stealers were one of the big bads in the era we have no information on. Things that we can't get any information on because it's going to be probably decades before GW ever puts any information out about that. I'm not saying they're never going to, just because money. Writing about that, putting out units from that, maybe making a previous separate set about that would be money. And they will do that. In the same way, I believe we're going to get a Horus figure in 40K. Probably a clone, but I think we're going to get it because, let's be honest, we would buy it. Yeah. In the same way I want to get most of the Primarchs. I'm not going to use them, but I want them. Yeah, rip my wallet. Either way, fan, damn you for making me need to go out and buy more sister models. I was so close. I was so close to getting out. And then, let's be honest, I'm not. You can see it over my shoulder. I'm not. That's just the stuff I haven't got boxed up to play with at the moment. Hell, I'm even doing some art. I've had this guy for a while now, and I'm just starting to paint him up now. He's been based for a while, and I never actually had any art on him. Also, he wasn't fully spray painted, so that's going to be fun. I'll deal with it. Had him for a while, never actually painted him. Fixing that. All the same. I'm geeking out over this. I want to get to the next one. But also, I just made it within the time limit of how much I could do this before running into pissing off my wife troubles. And I would like to avoid the pissing off my wife troubles again. Like that 9-hour stream I did where she thought it would be 2 hours. And I was very, very much in the doghouse for that one. Yeah, I'm trying not to redo that. All the same. You guys know the deal. There's a link below to the original video. Hit it up. And I'll see you in the next one. Adios.